All right, welcome everybody to the Phoenix Mug for July 2023. We're going to be looking at unlocking deliverability with Marketo Engage. Super excited to be diving into this and sharing this. At the end, we're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A, so definitely stick around for that. And of course, the session will be recorded and shared with everybody that joined on our attendance. So with that being said, let's dive right in. So today, your host, let's talk a little bit about ourselves and brag. I'll brag on Raja more than myself. Raja is principal consultant and founder of G&W Consulting. Been working in Marketo for 13 plus years. Myself, I'm a little bit more junior, but definitely familiar with the platform. Recently became a certified master and 3-time certified expert. So as we dive into this, just to give you some context, we're familiar with Marketo, a lot of other tools, but we really love Adobe products and Marketo Engage in particular. So what we're going to be talking about today, there's a lot of really cool things that we'll be diving into from an agenda standpoint. But high level, we're going to look at what deliverability is, deliverability killers, cracking the email deliverability in Marketo Engage, and then the tools that you could leverage, both free and paid, to boost your deliverability within the platform. But honestly, I think this could be a much shorter, potentially meeting, because all you have to do is just log into Marketo and go to the inbox juicer. Now, I don't know if you could see the inbox juicer, but it's really easy to use. You just go to email, and then you could choose, do you want it to appear at the top, your email, or the very top? And if you want to avoid spam traps, there's avoid or avoid in blue. So obviously, this is going to be the best way possibly to get your inbox, your email to the top of the inbox. But of course, just kidding. This is obviously for comedic purposes only. This is not a real page. It would be nice if Marketo gave us something like that, though, where we could literally just check a box and have our emails land at the top of the inbox. As you know, it's not the case. There's a lot of things to consider, and that's what we're going to be looking at during this presentation. So, what is deliverability? Well, deliverability is made up of a few different factors and a few different foundational elements that kind of drive it. So, email deliverability measures the success rate of emails reaching your subscribers' inbox. And that means that they're reaching the inbox, they're not being rejected, marked as spam, or headed to the junk folder. They're reaching the inbox. And it's a trust building process that at the end of the day is going to help drive business revenue. So, if email deliverability is good, you can anticipate, if your email marketing is good, that you can help drive revenue. Sender reputation is a crucial component of email deliverability as well, and is very similar to building a reputable brand or personal identity. So if you think about, what email inboxes and email clients are looking for, they're going to accept emails from those people they trust. And in the same way, we have to make sure that our email deliverability is strong and our sender reputation is strong. So what makes up email deliverability and our sender reputation? Here's the pillars of email deliverability. Now, one thing I will kind of flag out, I'm going to be sharing the slide deck with everybody, so I won't go, blow by blow through every single thing, but there's a few things that we'd like to keep in mind. So first, our SPF and sender policy framework. So when an email is sent, the recipient mail server can check the SPF record and make sure that it's coming from the right person. Domain keys are the same kind of thing where they're looking for that digital signature in the email header of an outgoing message to make sure that whoever says they're sending the email is the person sending the email. This is all about building trust and making sure that the people that are participating are the people that need to be involved in getting those emails. DMARC, a little bit different, but still the same kind of thing when we think about certification or reputation. It's really looking to see that your policies are in line with the DNS records. One thing that's kind of a pillar of deliverability that people don't typically take advantage of, but is an important one, is BIMI, or brand indicators for message identification. So this is kind of a cool thing that we've been rolling out for a lot of the Marketo Engage accounts that we've been working with. But essentially, this is a way that you can see who's sending it and get an authentication from that email client. So down here at the very bottom, you can see Grubhub, National Geographic, before BIMI and after BIMI. If you've ever gotten an email in your inbox and you see, like, for myself, it's usually AD, my initials or something to that effect. Instead, that would be swapped out with like the G&W logo or your company's branded logo. So before BIMI, after BIMI, so Grubhub and National Geographic. Speaking of Grubhub, almost lunchtime, probably gonna grab something. It's a good reminder. But with that being said, it shows up branded like it's coming from that person. And this is another way to build that reputation and build that trust with the email client that's receiving it. So another cool thing to kind of keep in mind, most people are familiar with SPF, they're familiar with DKIM and DMARC. This is one that is often overlooked, but still very, very powerful. So deliverability killers. What could kill your deliverability? When you think about practices or processes or things that are preventing your emails from reaching an inbox, these are the things that you want to look out for. So spam traps is at the very top of this list. And I wanted to include all the different types of spam traps and what they are, because a lot of times when, at least when I was starting to get into email deliverability or shooting for high deliverability, people said spam traps, but I wasn't aware that there were so many different versions of it. So pristine spam traps, for example, are email addresses that have never been associated with an active mailbox. They're essentially intentionally put out there to specifically capture people. The idea being here that if you have crawlers going through a website, or if you have purchased a list and they're looking to get people who've purchased that list, pristine spam traps are built with the sole intention of capturing senders who are using poor practices. Recycle traps, kind of similar in that way, but they were once active and have become inactive for an extended period of time and then being repurposed as a spam trap. So this is to kind of call out people who might leave emails in their database for a long time and not do anything with them or check them. They're essentially going to run into these recycled spam traps. Park traps, while not technically traps, mimic the behavior and may point to a list maintenance problem. So those domains are parked at registrars or monetization sites like Namecheap or above.com, and then they're leased to commercial trap providers for their trap network. So again, another way to kind of call out poor list maintenance or poor database cleanliness if you're not checking for them. And then typo traps. These are more common than I would like to admit in the different instances I've run into them. But essentially, when someone puts in their email address and doesn't complete it, like let's say instead of Gmail, it's gmy.com, or instead of Hotmail, Hotmy. Does anyone use Hotmail? I don't know. But instead of Yahoo, yahoo.com, those would be examples of typo traps, or even just misspelling their name in their actual email address. So those are the different types of spam traps that you might run into and the ones that you want to be careful of. And it's important to know that when you're looking at an email client, each spam trap is weighted pretty differently than the next. So not every spam trap that's a typo trap is going to be as detrimental to your sender reputation as a pristine trap, right? There's different weightings to these and different considerations with each one. So what can you do from this takeaway from spam traps is keep your list clean and make sure that you're doing some of the best practices that we'll talk about a little bit later. Next up, block lists. So when we think about block lists, this is kind of like the scariest thing, from an email deliverability standpoint. Stay away from the block list, or previously called blacklist. This is essentially the result of poor email sending practices. And there's two types of block lists that exist. You have DNSBL, so domain name system-based block list, and real-time block list. Now, there are localized block lists as well for companies or whatever it might be that they host, but essentially you're going to run into one of those two types. Now, to pull this from spamhouse.org, who is definitely flagshipping a lot of the spam practices and email best practices. Essentially, a sender can end up on a block list for a number of reasons, but primarily due to poor sending practices. So if you have poor sending practices, you're going to potentially run into a spam trap at some point and end up on a block list. Now, this little diagram, again, we're going to share the slide out, but just so you can kind of see what it looks like, it's essentially giving you a breakdown of how you get added to a block list if you're a sender with a bad reputation. So when you're affected by a block list, that's essentially going to give you, a bad reputation and put you in a situation where your emails are not making it to the inbox. Now, if you land on certain block lists, it's a little bit less relative in the same way as the spam traps, but there are block lists that you want to be incredibly mindful of. Now, if you're leveraging something like Marketo Engage and you're using a shared IP address, if you do hit a block list, you will typically receive an email notification and you'll get next steps on how to mitigate that process or how to get removed from that block list. The same is true for your dedicated IP addresses. You can definitely have a situation where you get on a block list, and whether it's with Microsoft or Yahoo, Gmail, and there's processes that you can take to mitigate and remove yourself from those block lists. One thing to be wary of as you're kind of diving into this world, you might end up on a block list that you don't want to be on, but they're trying to ask you to pay to be removed. Be cautious of pay to play sort of block list providers. They're usually low quality, not really that relevant, and they're essentially blocking, air quotes here, anyone that they can in order to get to generate revenue for their company. All right. And by the way, as I'm going through this, if anyone wants to jump in with a question or something like that, you should be able to, and we can spend some more time chatting about it. Definitely open to have a dialogue as we're going through the presentation. Don't want to do a brain dump with no sort of insight. So when we think about the different kind of considerations we want to have, database cleanliness is another one. So we have spam traps, you can end up on block lists, but also at the very basic, database cleanliness needs to be maintained. So when we're maintaining a clean database with active, engaged subscribers, it's an important part of keeping that email deliverability high. And there's a few things that we can consider with Marketo as a tool on things that we can do. So what do we want to look at? Now, this is, again, very base level. We're going to dive into some more detailed strategies on how to treat individual records that come in. But if the email addresses are old, you should be asking yourself the question, how old are my subscriber list? How old are the persons in my database? Are they active and engaged with the content that's going out? And if they're not, are they inactive? If my subscribers are not that old or aged out, are they engaging with the emails that we're sending out and receiving? If not, that could be a potential problem. Data enrichment tools, things like ZoomInfo and Clearbit, while they're great and excellent ways to enrich data that's inside of your Marketo Engage or CRM instance, it's an important thing to keep in mind that the data is not always accurate, and I don't want to throw out superfluous figures here, but I would anticipate anywhere between 70 to 80% accuracy in most cases. So with that in mind, are subscribers being enriched with a data enrichment tool that's not necessarily doing the best job? And if so, that can impact your email deliverability. And then purchase list, which is probably out of all of these items, the biggest no-no. We do not want to purchase lists whenever we can. And even in this, the case of content syndication or something similar, it's worthwhile kind of bringing those two together, that the quality is going to be potentially lower than someone voluntarily opting into your database. So again, these things can impact email deliverability from that standpoint. Now let's talk about Marketo Engage, because I think that's why everyone is on the call. Get a little. So when we think about those pillars of deliverability, what's what? How do you maintain good email practices? Marketo Engage, there's a few things that we do and strategies that we implement to make sure that emails are making it to the inbox in the best possible way. And this is where we're going to spend a majority of our time talking through the different components that exist within Marketo Engage. So let's talk about our bounce house protocol. Now, in every Marketo Engage instance, we recommend creating a bounce house program. This program leverages smart campaigns and smart lists to take care of bounces, chronic non-responders, invalid emails, bot clicks, and monitor unsubscribes due to spam complaints. And there's a few other considerations that exist, obviously, but these are the main ones that we're looking at. So we'll kind of go through each one of these, blow by blow, to kind of give the full breakdown of what that looks like. Now, how do they impact email deliverability? At the very base level, whenever we see a lot of bounces or whenever we see a lot of issues with the data cleanliness or perceived issues, once we've kind of taken all the steps that we can around old email addresses or unactive or inactive email addresses, these are kind of the steps that we take to mitigate that. So from the standpoint top down, chronic non-responders. A chronic non-responder, in the simplest possible way, is just someone who's not really interested in the content that we're sending out. And a chronic non-responder can be problematic for a lot of ways. Generally, if they're not engaging, there's really a couple of red flags that might go up. If you're not engaging, one, is the email content relevant? Two, are we even making it to your inbox? We might have like a good deliverability rate. Maybe we're not getting kicked back by spam traps or blacklists, but potentially we're ending up in the junk folder, or you're just skipping right over our emails and putting us straight into the trash. In either case, if we have people that have received 5+ emails and haven't opened or clicked any of them in the last 1 to 2 months, we're essentially putting you in that chronic non-responder smart list. We're identifying you as a chronic non-responder. Now, chronic non-responders aren't necessarily records that we want to delete right off the bat, but it's a good kind of indicator that things aren't going the right way. If you're in a relationship and they stop returning your calls and texts, you can probably assume that something is wrong, or in the case if you're married, if you ask your wife or your husband, is anything going on? And they say, oh, nothing, or I'm fine, then obviously something is wrong, right? So chronic non-responders, they're not necessarily an issue right now, but they could be. Now, hard bounces, I'm sure many people are familiar with from an email deliverability standpoint. We look for hard bounces that have a category 2 or category 1, and we identify those because that's an invalid email, which can be a huge issue with spam. And then also or a huge issue with deliverability, or category 1, which is spam, which if we're seeing a lot of category 1s, we want to know where they're coming from, who's marking us as spam, and why our emails are being marked in spam is the way they are. So we monitor those hard bounces, and you can see those smart lists are broken out individually based on the category. And then we have our own dedicated smart list for invalid email. If we send out an email and it gets marked as invalid, but it's not necessarily a spam, or we're not getting a category 2, it might be something unrelated, then we want to keep that in mind. Or even if it's being manually updated, we want to keep that in mind. We also look for potential bot clicks. So those persons who exhibit bot click or bot like activity would be one sort of a filter in that or scenario. But also anyone who's opened, or excuse me, anyone who's clicked a link in an email but didn't open the email or visit a web page. So if you're clicking links in our emails but you're not even opening them, or you're not even visiting a web page after you click the link in the email, we're going to say, okay, this potentially is a bot. And there's some cool ways that you can actually track this. I didn't include a slide on this, but just as a little bonus nugget, one thing that we do to track bot clicks within the emails that we send out is we'll typically add into our template a small 1 pixel by 1 pixel white dot. Now, this dot is unperceivable. You can't see it. No one getting the email is going to know it's even there, but we link that and we tie a specific UTM campaign to that white dot. Now, if anyone clicks on that dot, we know that it's a bot or it's some sort of spam filtering service that's scanning the email and giving us a false click. And when we identify records like that, we remove them. But that's a little bonus for that bot click, because despite best efforts, sometimes the open pixel doesn't fire. Sometimes Marketo engages. Bot click detector will falsely detect someone as a bot, but that's one more layer that we have to kind of identify. And again, potential is the key word here for bot clicks. Also, soft bounces. So soft bounces are persons who soft bounce from an email with a category 3 and a subcategory of 399 or 3999, which is an out of office, or a category 3 excluding out of office in the last 30 days. Soft bounces are important to track. Again, they might not be an immediate problem similar to that chronic non-responder, but they do indicate something might be wrong with that inbox. If we're seeing that someone's inbox is full for months on end, that person might not be there anymore at all, and potentially the IT team just hasn't cleaned them up. Or if we're seeing soft bounces, happen very frequently on a particular person record, we might want to avoid sending them an email for a while to allow that to clear up. And then the last one, unsubscribed because of spam complaint or customer complaint received from ISP. Now, when somebody unsubscribes and the reason is customer complaint received from ISP, definitely a big problem. This is going to be something that you probably noticed in your inboxes. I noticed, for Google Workspaces, which is what I use personally, there's an option that you can unsubscribe from an email directly in the toolbar for Google rather than scrolling down to the bottom of the email and finding that unsubscribe link. This is where we're going to be able to identify those. So again, if we're monitoring these smart lists and we're seeing in one of these areas, not only do we know, okay, we need to address it, but it's going to give us an idea of how we actually address it. So knowing there's a problem is one thing, but how to approach it is a totally another thing. So this is the foundation of our bounce house protocol. So once we've identified these issues, hard bounces go straight to the trash. Unsubscribed, obviously, we're not going to touch. But what do we do with these chronic non-responders, these potential bot clicks, and these soft bounces? Well, I won't let you hang too long. I will tell you. We go right to jail, database jail. And kudos to anyone who can identify that meme on the right-hand side. I kind of plugged that in, but I was like, maybe people don't get it. If you've seen Parks and Rec, then you definitely know. Our standard practice for hard bounces and spam is that they get immediate deletion, right? So if you're a hard bounce for spam or email invalid, there's no reason for you to be in our database. If you unsubscribe for a spam complaint, then obviously we're not going to email you. But for those other audiences, what do we do? So persons that are impacting our deliverability but could be valid records are marked as marketing suspended true. That's the first step. We want to make sure they're not getting any emails during this time. And while we don't want to purge them from the database immediately, we want to take some steps to make sure that they are valid. So in these cases, the persons that are added into what we call a reactivation program as a last effort to capture them before purging them from the database. Now, there's a few things about our reactivation program that we'd like to keep in mind. And again, if you're in Marketo and you're familiar with the platform, there's a million different ways to kind of build a program and implement it. So, by all means, create the reactivation program of your dreams. We just recommend 4 key things that are included in the reactivation program to make sure that it's a success. And these are some of the tenets that we go by when we're working on a program like this. So the first thing is we send out text-based emails, and we send out 3 of them over a 1-week period. Now, and this is once they're added to the program, right? So if I send out an email, let's say to a soft bounce record, and they come back and we see that they're soft bounce or they're a chronic non-responder, they haven't opened emails, we're probably not going to send this email the moment that we've marked them as chronic non-responder or the moment that we've marked them as chronic soft bounce. We'll give a timeline of maybe 2 to 3 days before we add them to this. But once they're added, 1 week time from that period, we're going to send out 3 text-based emails. The reason that we do a text-based email is because potentially and we want to remove all variables, but potentially the email HTML is what's causing that record to not get the email. That could potentially be one of the issues. Also, text-based emails have a much higher success making it to the inbox when they don't seem as salesy. If you're using something like Gmail, which in a B2B environment you don't see a ton of this, but if you're using something like Gmail, there's the promotions tab, or in Outlook there's that focus tab. When we send text-based, we can take a step towards avoiding those specific filters in the inbox. Not always, but usually. And the email content itself that we're sending out is geared towards asking for permission to keep in the database. Now, this is purely a tactic that is driven by marketing, right? It's not driven by compliance. We're not saying that, okay, we need the permission in every case, unless you're working with GDPR or CCPA. But really, we're kind of trying to drive an action that will be a very real action. So if I open up an email and they say, hey, we want to ask permission to keep you in our database, or you're going to get deleted, and I want to continue to receive those emails, I will click the link and follow through with it. On the flip side, though, if I'm not, then I have no problem being purged, right? This is purely from an email cleanup standpoint. And again, we use text-based email so we can keep the content as simple as possible. The second tenet of this program that we like to keep in mind, if a person bounces on any of the emails, then they're immediately put in that deletion bucket. So if we've given you time to recover from your soft bounces or your chronic non-responders, or if you're a potential bot click, if we've given you the appropriate time to recover from that, and we send you an email and you bounce, immediate deletion, right to jail, right? If a person is sent an email and it doesn't bounce, but they're unresponsive to all three, like they don't open it, they don't engage with it, then right to jail. We're putting them immediately in that deletion bucket. And if a person doesn't open an email but clicks the link in the email, potential bot activity, same thing, right to jail. Now, these are our recommendations, right? Take this and season to flavor, right? You can mix and match whatever you think is going to be the best mix of strategy here. But really, those are the three things that we want to keep in mind, or the four things that we want to keep in mind with these audiences. If they're not responding, we want to get them to respond. If they're constantly bouncing, we want to get them to not bounce. And if they look like a bot, we want to make sure that they are a bot, right? And if they're not a bot, perfect. That's great. All's right with the world. But once they've gone through this program and we've identified those people, we'll typically move them into a status that makes sense within the program, and we'll add them to a reactivation list that will just turn on and remove that marketing suspended as true, flip it to false, clear out their marketing suspended date, and reintroduce them into the world, right? Now, to take this a step further, one of the things that you could do, and it depends on what you want to do from a Marketo Engage standpoint, is you can have a custom field or a checkbox that's program specific, tied to the program member, to say, has run through or completely successfully went through this program, right? And whenever you want to reference maybe that program for reactivation to say, okay, this person is bouncing again, did they already go through this reactivation? You can always check on that. Of course, there's practices in place that will prevent that anyways, and especially program membership is important, but you can always leverage program member fields to identify, okay, what's going on with this particular record? Have we already tried to bring them back to life, so to speak? All right, little sip of water. And does anyone know this meme, by the way? I'm just curious because I think I have like 2 more memes in here, and for what it's worth, I try to keep these things light, excuse me. All right. So let's get you warmed up. This is another component of strategy that we definitely recommend. So an element of email marketing that's often overlooked, but it's pretty key in getting and maintaining great email deliverability, is the practice of warming up new persons in the database. So when you think about like a purchase list, this is usually pretty common and synonymous with that, or an event list or something like that. This is usually pretty common. But I think it's something that should be applied across the board for all new persons, no matter where they're coming from. So when we think about warming up people, this is a warm-up period where a person will live in an exclusionary smart list and receive emails that are outside of your regular send cadence to demonstrate that they're valid, deliverable, and engaged. So what does that look like? Now, these are just ideas. If there's a situation that applies specific to your company, I definitely recommend digging into it. But example of warm-up emails could include a welcome series or welcome emails, double opt-in confirmations. That's going to be the most relevant for like GDPR and CCPA from a compliance standpoint. But just to call this out, I think double opt-in confirmations work really well for a lot of reasons. And while it's something that you have to set up for Marketo Engage, it's not like an out-the-box sort of feature. I do think that when you implement double opt-in confirmations for all of your marketing, you will see much higher deliverability and much higher engagement because people have to take that additional step to engage. We've also leveraged persona surveys to have people that when they come into the database, we ask them, hey, we want to ask a few questions. Take this quick survey. We would love to know a little bit more about your interest, which is great for segmentation because segmentation is one of the strategies that we recommend to say, okay, if somebody comes into the database and we don't know what they really are interested in, and we have 4 or 5 different areas of our business or our company that we could talk about, and they don't talk about it, that could lead to reduced engagement as well. And then obviously new subscriber offers and rebates. So if you're brand new, click this link to get an offer or take advantage of this rebate. Text-based emails, that's maybe more of a formatting decision rather than an actual type of email. But usually if you leverage a text-based email, you could have that come from an LDR or a rep profile or whitelist instructions. So this is kind of a cool one. And we'll talk about whitelisting a little bit later. But if you're a brand new record that comes into our database, we're going to send you a list, a set of instructions to whitelist us for your send profile, which is kind of a cool thing to think about. The first intro that you have is to whitelist. Not everyone's going to do this, but let's say 20% of people do it, or even 15% of people do it. That's going to be a nice little bump in all the records that are coming into your database, going through the process of whitelisting or adding you as a trusted sender. And that's going to improve email deliverability. And a result of proving email deliverability, you're going to improve engagement. And that might be worth mentioning right now as well, is when we think about email deliverability and what it means to have like good email deliverability, it can kind of seem almost like a less important metric, but I would probably argue it's one of the most important metrics when you look at email, because if the email is making it to the inbox, it's getting delivered, then a rising tide lifts all boats. You're going to see improved opens. You're going to see improved clicks. And I've literally had people say to me, well, hey, you don't want to get your email deliverability too good because then people will start unsubscribing. To be honest, I would rather have great email deliverability and get those people that don't want to receive my emails out the way so that the people who need to see them ultimately are able to see them better. Undercooked, overcooked, right to Joe. All right, so all the tools. So as we kind of go into this part, I do want to preface this. When we talk about tools, I'm really talking about strategies and then physical things that you can use within the platform. So when we talk about Marketo Engage, for example, there's a couple things that will go into it. So for example, one area is Marketo Engage, and then we'll look at some other tools as well that could help identify problems or possibly troubleshoot what might be going on. So within Marketo Engage, there's a couple of different things that we could do. I think the first thing that we want to do from a strategic standpoint is identify problematic audiences. Now, how can we do that in Marketo Engage? And again, slide deck's going to be sent over, but we'll break this down. We like to run weekly email performance report subscriptions that drill down by lead source, industry, or any other relevant segmentation to identify which audiences are the best or worst performing in terms of email deliverability. And you could do the exact same thing when you have that report for opens, clicks, unsubscribes, hard bounces or soft bounces. Those email reports are going to give you everything. You can also use domain-specific smart list inside of that email report to look at the domains that might be the worst offenders. The way that we've seen this leveraged before, and the way that we like to leverage it, is to say, let's say that your email database is split into 4 or 5 different groups, right? Let's say you have Gmail addresses, AOL addresses, business addresses, QQ addresses, whatever those common domains that are coming into your database look like. You can run reports to say, okay, how many people are bouncing in this one? How many people are bouncing in this one? If we don't have any personal domains, we could do it by company or again, by lead source, industry, or any other segmentation. And those reports, since they're on a weekly subscription, I probably wouldn't recommend daily, but if on a weekly subscription, we can know pretty quickly where we need to make tweaks or where we need to address things. If we're running a report and we're noticing that lead source of a website referral or paid advertising has been performing really poorly, that might point to an issue with our paid ads potentially where we're getting a lot of spam traffic coming there. How do we resolve that? How do we address that so we don't hurt our email deliverability? Do we need to suspend a program that's sending out emails? Do we need to quarantine those records? Those things can help us make decisions in real time based on our email performance report. If you want to track down offending persons, this is another sort of strategy leveraging a tool in Marketo Engage. We again use smart lists and smart list subscriptions so we could identify which records are the cause of poor email deliverability. So if we see a lot of records being flagged as spam, invalid email, we can float that up to the admin, or the admin can see it pretty quickly and act on it. And typically, when we see when we track down offending persons with, by leveraging Smart List, we typically see trends, right? We typically see trends related to a region or an ISP, or something is going to be trending with that particular issue. Now, if you don't have a ton of these kinds of records, then maybe a trend won't be as relevant. But if we're tracking on a weekly basis, we're looking at the Smart List and we notice a huge tick up in one of our Smart Lists, then okay, there's probably something happening that we need to address and troubleshoot. Item number 3 right here, capture bounce details. This is kind of a cool and a more custom strategy, slightly more advanced, but I still think it's very relevant. By leveraging a combination of trigger-based smart campaigns and custom fields, we can capture what happens when an email bounces. Now, this does require us to create maybe program-specific fields or person-specific fields in Marketo, which is fine if you're looking to track this. But we can also, but by leveraging trigger-based smart campaign and tokens, we can track the name of the email. So what caused that bounce to happen? What type of bounce was it using that token? And then what was the category of the bounce? Now, while we have access to these details, we can pull Smart List on these details and we can see it in the activity log. It's sometimes nice to have fields that you can reference very easily and quickly, and then also be able to have a smart campaign that's going to have members associated with it that tie to those custom fields. So when we think about what we could do, these are great ways that we could do it. We can identify when it happened. Is this the first time it's happened? Is it when was the last time that it happened? Is it happening again? These are all different ways that we could kind of troubleshoot bounce details and pull reports to say, okay, how many people from this particular email bounce with the Cat 3 based on what we're seeing in this particular smart campaign. So another kind of cool way that we could pull in data from a strategy standpoint and leverage it. Dedicated IP addresses. So typically we see shared IPs, but dedicated IP addresses within Marketo Engage can be really powerful. They do require a warming process, so you do have to kind of warm them up. You don't necessarily have to send thousands or millions of emails right away. You have to warm them up. But once they're warmed up and they're warmed up correctly, deliverability is always excellent. Now, of course, we have to implement all of the other things that we're doing, right? So good email practice, good data hygiene, making sure that we're sending the right kind of emails to the right kind of people with segmentation. All that stuff still has to apply, but having a dedicated IP address is a huge bonus. Now, one of the challenges with shared IP addresses is, one, you can't build up your reputation independently, right? The IP address could change. Actually checking the status of it could vary from day to day. If someone is a bad actor or multiple people are a bad actor on your shared IP addresses, that could potentially impact your deliverability, right? You don't want those things to happen. That's another reason to have a dedicated IP. But one caveat I will say, if you get a dedicated IP address, the benefits, huge. But the warming process has to be done correctly. If the warming isn't done correctly, there's a chance that you could run into a brick wall with deliverability and have a lot of issues. Now, usually, if you have a dedicated IP and you land on a block list, which is unfortunate, but typically, if you can demonstrate, whether it's Microsoft or Gmail or whoever it might be, if you can demonstrate that you're taking actions to resolve the issue, that you've isolated the problem, you can usually get taken off them. But one thing I just want to flag is being very cautious and careful, because you never know. All right. Another item, obviously, request whitelisting. So this was earlier as one of those warm-up email strategies. But again, if we have a specific person segmentation in our database that we're emailing regularly, and this doesn't have to happen in Marketo, right? We could reach out to that company directly. So if you have customers, for example, you can always request that they add the sender domain to an internal allow list, as well as the IP address, to ensure that emails make it to the inbox every time. Now, the nice thing too is if you request the whitelist, even on a shared IP address, not just dedicated, you can give them ranges to allow for the whitelist, so you can still get that whitelisting accomplished. You just have to request that range from your Marketo support rep. You'll be able to get that and share that with them. But oftentimes when we have relationships, with different businesses, and we want to make sure our emails are making it to their inbox, we can reach out to somebody internally. And if you have a friend on the IT side, say, hey, do me a solid and let's add our domain and our IPs to your whitelist process. They're usually pretty open to it. So definitely something to consider as well. Now, of course, you can't always do that with net new prospects or whatever it might be, but for the people that you trust and the people that you know and want your emails, definitely a good way to look. And then the last item here for leveraging Marketo Engage tools, is Everest Deliverability tools within Marketo Engage. So Marketo Engage provides deliverability tools which are provided by that Everest platform, and it can be a game changer when it comes to things like inbox placement, spam traps, and email engagement beyond opens and clicks. What I really like about it, and I'll talk this up for a second, is that you have this suite of tools that you can leverage. So you can see how designs look. You can see how subject lines look. For example, if you submit a subject line, you can see how the subject line and the pre-header will render across multiple platforms. You can see inbox placement within your seed list. So you can create like a seed list of emails that are weighted based on your database and see how they perform when compared to the community. You can also see engagement metrics that are pretty game changing. So you can see, not only opens and clicks, but we can get away with all those proxy clicks, which we know can be kind of painful, right? Apple proxy, Google proxy, Yahoo proxy, where they're saying, hey, you've opened the email, but not really. Everest deliverability tools within Marketo Engage help cuts through a lot of that. And we can also see things like read times. How long did they read the email? Did they read it for 8 seconds or more? Did they glance at it? A lot of really powerful tools from an email deliverability standpoint. Because again, just to tie that back in, email deliverability goes hand in hand with engagement. If you're sending engaging content, if you're sending relevant content to the audience that needs it, it's going to perform well. You're going to make it to the inbox and make it to the inbox often. Now let's talk about some of those free tools to use. So there's a number of free and freemium tools that you can use to help improve deliverability and troubleshoot how well your sending domain and IP addresses are performing. Now, I recommend checking across multiple platforms, but those first two items are part of helping improve deliverability right out the gate. If you haven't set up Google Postmaster Tools or Microsoft SNDS, I recommend doing this right away. They're free to use. There's no restrictions behind it. You don't have to pay for it, and they're all about helping inboxes better. Now, if you think about Google, people typically will associate that with the Gmail account, but lots of businesses are leveraging Google Workspace tools, and email is one of them, and Gmail is one of them. So you could be sending to business accounts that are hosted on Google, and obviously the same thing is true for Microsoft. But these will help you get better placement, help you build your reputation with these platforms. And again, they're free to use, and for what it's worth, they're easy to use. Not that these tools are ever super easy as it is, but your team will be able to implement that pretty quickly. Spamhouse.org checker will give you an idea of how your reputation is. Same thing with SenderScore. We'll look at your IP address directly. You can see how your IP addresses perform on a daily basis. So that's something that we check pretty frequently. We'll hop in there and look and say, okay, we had a high volume of emails that went out this day, and our sender score dropped to 86 for the day. What can we do to or prevent that happening from moving forward? And what was our average score for the month or for the week? MX Toolbox, again, freemium offering. You can hop in there and see, how your domain is performing. Is it set up correctly? Are emails going to be reaching the inbox based on that setup? And then Barracuda Central to see if you're listed on any spam traps that they help manage and maintain. So again, these are just tools in your toolkit. And if I go back a little bit, we have a lot of things that exist within Marketo Engage that we can start using right away. If anything, outside of like Google Postmasters and Microsoft SNDS, if anything, those last four, those are really just a gut check what's going on. So if you have a problem with deliverability that seems to be extending or lasting a long, long time, it's worthwhile to say, okay, let's look at Spamhouse, SenderScore, MX Toolbox, Barracuda Central. Let's see if we can troubleshoot why this is happening. And usually these are going to be good ways for you to identify the problem, which you can then address inside of Marketo. And I saw one comment from Guy. So Guy, for Everest deliverability tools, I believe it depends on the subscription that for the level of access that you get. You'd have to check with your Marketo support, or not support person, excuse me, but your Marketo Adobe rep rather, and see if it's included in your subscription. I'll be honest, if you twist their arm a little bit, I think there's a good opportunity for you to really leverage this tool and get a good deal on it. So definitely ask about it and maybe say that you learned about it through a mug. That might help you with that conversation. But with that in mind, yeah, definitely leveraging these tools is more of a post doing everything else. So once you've gone through the process of making sure your list is clean, making sure you're sending to not old records, not unengaged records, not records that are potentially spam traps or have typos in them. Once you've gone through the process of identifying what emails are bouncing, how to prevent it, reaching out and getting whitelisting where you can, once you've done like every other step, then we use these tools to kind of check and make sure that things are aligned with where we want to be. The only exception here, I guess, would be Postmasters and SMDS. You could probably do those right away. But with that being said, let's talk about. Well, excuse me, I didn't put a slide in here, but let's open it up for questions and conversation. I definitely want to get any questions that people might have, and then we can talk about it a little bit more. But of course, we also want to talk about that next Phoenix mug and when that's going to be. And obviously, that one's going to be in person. So anyone that can kind of join will be awesome. I don't think, Guy, you can just there for a little bit, but obviously, welcome to come down and visit when things get a little chillier up there. But yeah, let's open it up for some Q&A, and happy to answer any questions. Maybe I'll cue the music. I don't know, like the Jeopardy music. I won't sing it myself, I promise. Akande, what if we do everything and it still doesn't work? Great question. So if you've tried every single one of these things and exhausted them, and for whatever reason you're still seeing poor email deliverability, I think it's worthwhile to reach out to your Marketo support rep and ask them, because there are things that could potentially be impacting email deliverability that you're not really privy to, or that don't come out of the woodworks right away. I think we've covered an exhaustive list, and obviously when you have the slide deck, you can always go back and reference it. But it's always worthwhile going to Adobe directly and saying, hey, I'm not getting the most out of Marketo Engage. What can I do to get even more? Is there a recommended max number of, and this is from Donna, thank you for asking this question. Is there a recommended max number of people from the same company to include in the same email blast to help prevent getting blocked? That's a good question. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's pretty much like, let's say I'm sending out an email to company A. Should I include more people or less people based on that send? So this would kind of tie into, Guy, you hit the nail on the head. This would tie into throttling. What we typically do as part of kind of let's say that we go to an event, we get a very large event list, and let's say that one company or several companies have hundreds of records associated with each one. We'll typically take the throttling approach. Now, how you can do that in Marketo, it's a little bit you kind of have to work with what the tools you have, but we'll typically create smart list or list that have those records associated with them. So I'll create a smart list that'll say something like, a company is company A, or company is company A through C, and the next one will be company C through D, or whatever that might be. I'll run that smart list through a smart campaign, and I'll random sample that list out. So I'll say random sample is 10, or even sometimes if we want to be really extreme, random sample is 2, and that's going to be a percentage point for that total send. I'll add multiple choices to it, and I'll take every single one of those records and add them to individual static lists. Once I've done that, I'll then send out emails to those static lists, and in the same tone that Guy mentioned, throttled out. So I'll send static list 1, wait an hour, static list 2, wait an hour, static list 3. That would be the best way to approach it. There's not really a minimum or maximum, number. It's going to depend on a lot of things, like your sender reputation, for example. You could definitely leverage that. You could definitely, send out as many as you want. You could leverage the whole list and send it to everybody. If you have a strong sender reputation, that would be perfectly fine. Do you use the universal feedback tool from Everest? It's a good question. I don't know if I've ever personally used the universal feedback tool. There's a lot of great tools that they do leverage, like engagement, inbox placement, being able to monitor spam traps, that sort of thing. But I'm not entirely familiar with the universal feedback tool, but we'll look into that. Okay, great question, Victoria. So, how might you handle a case where you notice bounces happening disproportionately with a specific email client? So, this kind of ties into actually the question around the company example. So, we would approach it with throttling. Essentially, you want to build your reputation in the short term. So, in that same process, I'll identify the group that's being impacted. So, if that's a particular domain or company name or whatever that might be, I'll isolate them to a specific list. I'll break that list out into multiple lists. So, if I have a list of 1,000, for example, I might break that list into 10 different lists of 100 people each. So I'm taking the same list, but I'm breaking it out. I'm going to send an email to that first list. I'm going to take my practices kind of implemented for the warm-up email. So let me pop over there really quickly. So I'm going to probably, use a text-based email. I'm going to make it maybe an email that's really, or actually, sorry, the database. I'm going to make it an email that's really straightforward. When I send that email out, I'm expecting a strong deliverability because I'm only sending to 100 people. Once I send it to that 100 people and I get good deliverability, 99%, 98%, then I'll wait a day or whatever time might make the most sense, and then send to 200 people. And if I see that still that strong 98, 99% deliverability, I'll wait a day, however long I want to wait. The next day, I'll send it to 400 people, and I'll continue to double the number of people that I'm going to reach out to until I exhaust that entire list. And that's one way to build up that reputation over time. We do a similar approach with IP warming, because IP warming is one of those things where you want to make sure that your IP address and your sender reputation is respected across not only one client but all clients, right? We want to make sure that we're hitting the inbox in a nice way for everybody. Guys, so you asked, can you touch on any email validation tools that could be leveraged prior to list endpoints that are HIPAA compliant? That is a great question. So HIPAA compliance is not an area that I'm entirely familiar with. GDPR and CCPA, CASL, those are areas are usually what I'm interacting with pretty consistently. For HIPAA compliance, I imagine there is a tool that markets itself as being HIPAA compliant, but realistically, I think it's a more manual process to say, what data for patients am I allowed to import and what data am I not allowed to import? Uh, and I don't know if that really answers your question. I do apologize. I've never had a list tool that we specifically use for HIPAA compliance. Now, one thing that Everest does offer within the Marketo Engage stack is you can use list validation, which will help you identify invalid emails and risky emails and good emails. So you can leverage that just for general email deliverability. But as far as HIPAA compliance, I'm not familiar with any tool that specializes in that. This is from Deborah. Do you recommend sending to an engaged person more often than unengaged? If so, what kind of ratio? Well, this is an excellent question. So, do I recommend sending to an engaged person more often than unengaged? Absolutely, right? I think the idea of an engaged person is going to be someone who meets the criteria for an engaged person. Now, if you are an unengaged person, that could go two ways. You could be a chronic non-responder, in which case I do recommend marketing suspending and going through that process. If you're just not opening every email, I wouldn't necessarily send less email to you. It depends on your marketing initiative. One thing that's important to keep in mind is Marketo Engage does have a send limit that's both daily and weekly. So that's going to be a business decision to say, how many emails do we want to send out on a daily basis and a weekly basis? And then there's another step to that to say, how many emails do we want to send out a day to anybody, if they're engaged or unengaged? I think really it's more about, I want to engage the people that are relevant, and I want to do it in a way that leverages automation. So if I'm someone in your database and I open an email and I click a link and I go to a page and I'm looking at the page for a resource, but I don't download it, I would love to send that person or send myself an email from Marketo Engage with that resource, because I've had them tracked. I'm able to see them, right? Say, hey, I saw you checking out this email or this resource on the website, wanted to send it via email. That's a situation where I'm sending to an engaged person more often than an unengaged person. But that doesn't really impact my overall email batch and blast sort of strategy. We really want to leverage automation to drive those decisions. Does that answer your question, Deborah? Sure. I'll take sure. I think it's a business decision ultimately. If we're saying engage is someone who's opening email, we want to send them emails, right? We don't want to stop sending them emails. But at the same time, if engaged is someone that's open an opportunity, we might suspend sending them emails, which would, in one way or another, kind of go against that logic, right? So, but yeah, thank you for that question. Excellent question. Ooh, AI. So there's a couple of cool tools that exist already. Obviously, AI intelligence exists within Marketo Engage. Things like real-time personalization, which isn't AI in and of itself, but is also another great tool to use in Marketo Engage if you're not leveraging it. There's lots of ways to engage outside of just email within Marketo Engage. So I think that's an important component. Now, for AI tools, I'm all about the AI tools. So I'm using Chat GPT to kind of compare subject lines or even email copy. I'm using Chat GPT and other AI tools to create different call to actions depending on what it might be. The image that we have for this particular mug meeting, I actually generated using Midjourney, which is an AI tool. And while I haven't had the courage, I guess I would say, to start using AI, for example, in emails, we do use it on our website, for example. I think AI with video and image and generative language models are all really powerful ways. And I know that Adobe as a company recently came out with generative AI, as well, which is kind of a cool tool as well. But I think those are areas that you could definitely leverage. Now, when we think about AI inside of Marketo Engage, that's really going to be identifying your best sort of subscribers, or your best subscribers that will lead to some sort of opportunity or revenue increase for your business, right? It's a little bit different. But I would say if you haven't used ChatGPT to subject line test, I would 100% do that. If you haven't used ChatGPT to modify your emails or write your emails, I would 100% do that. Yeah, predictive aspect, exactly. Exactly. So it's a little bit different within Marketo Engage, but I would definitely leverage, whatever's available in your subscription. If you want to bump it up, I think by all means do it. But to leverage that and be able to pull that out, understanding what emails at the best times are going to go out is going to be good. If you want to keep it simpler, I would just say create A/B tests with your existing email assets. Use something like ChatGPT to generate subject line tests and do multiple series of testing, right? Do a test on email one week and then swap out the subject line for the winner champion challenger the next week, and continue to make those iterative changes. There's a lot of ways that we can leverage what's existing in the general ecosystem of AI to drive what's happening in Marketo Engage. But yeah, predictive AI is a key component within Marketo Engage, and CRM as well if you have Einstein or something like that with Salesforce. So all righty. Well, with that being said, if there's any other questions, happy to keep chatting. Again, this recording is going to be sent over to everyone along with the slide deck for the upcoming mug. I'm guessing, Raja, you want to chat about that a little bit, but I know we're going to be doing some in-person events pretty soon.
Yeah, we'll talk about like what the in-person mug looks like if you're going to be if you're in the local Arizona area. Guy, to real quickly follow up on your question regarding validation tools. There isn't a specific validation tool for HIPAA compliance. However, there are VPN, like secure HIPAA compliant items that have tracking script that essentially that you could use to to ensure like you are HIPAA compliant as an org, which coincides essentially with with email send as well. Like there isn't one specific for email, but there's one for organizations and one for organization. I'm trying to find it. If not, I'll send it up in the follow-up email. I remember we worked with one company that had it. I'm just trying to figure out what that one was, but I'll send it over in the follow-up email as well.
Awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, thank everybody for joining today. We'll try to make that in-person mug happen pretty soon. But if not, we'll do some more virtual ones, be able to meet with everybody. And yeah, I think we're starting a LinkedIn group as well to get everybody connected. But thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Oh,
Take care. Oh,
one more thing, you gotta join the LinkedIn group. If there are topics or anything that you could want to cover or you want us to cover, by all means, let us know. I'm gonna actually real quick before we jump off, I'm gonna post this LinkedIn the Phoenix LinkedIn group here. Uh, so please go ahead and join it. It's in chat. We'll set it up. We'll send it out via email here as well. Or for the follow-up email, we'll send it there as well. So if there's topics, anything that you guys want, just feel free to put it in that chat, and then we're gonna try to see if we can get as much involvement of like what topics to cover and what everyone's talking about. Our last one was about multi-touch attribution. This one's about deliverability. Instead of just picking the next one, we'll try to get as many people involved as possible. So thank you.